The other question I wanted to ask you about writing is that, when we talk about writing and what writing can do and achieve, I think more often than not, we think about widening people's experiences and creating empathy. And more often than not, that's empathy with characters in books and people's different lived experiences. And I think that one of the things that you're doing in your books, and I think there are a few other writers that are doing this who are writing in the nature and travel genres at the moment, is trying to create almost a sense of empathy with nature itself. And I wonder whether that was something you set out to do when you were writing the book, and also whether or why you think that's such an important thing as well.
I certainly wasn't writing in that vein when I wrote The Salt Path, but the nature within The Salt Path was almost like a third character in the book. But when I really came to understand what the structure of the Wild Silence would be, I realised that I was writing about that deep connection to nature and about the natural world and how we respond to it and how it's responding to us. And I think to write about the natural world as a reflection of our own experiences is maybe a really powerful way of bringing people into thinking about nature in a way that they maybe haven't had the opportunity to before, of maybe realising that the natural world isn't something just to be observed, but it is part of us. We are part of it. We are the natural world. And I think it's only through that connection, that understanding, that we are going to be able to address all of the issues that we so seriously need to address with regards to the climate and how we take that forwards at the moment.
And do you feel also that there's something, I mean, it's not religious, because I don't think you're a conventionally religious person, but I think it feels like there's something slightly spiritual in the way that you write, in terms of providing some equivalence of the nature around you to human experience and human presence. There's a sense that walking along these paths, despite the fact that for miles and miles you may not come across people, there's life everywhere, and that you perhaps come to terms with your own sense of mortality and so on in this constantly alive world. I wonder whether that was something that you explored deliberately, and whether or not you felt that was the case.
I did explore that quite deliberately, actually. I mean, anyone who's read The Salt Path will know I'm not a person of any religious or conventionally spiritual belief. But what I was trying to explain in The Wild Silence was actually that possibly I do have a spiritual connection to the natural world. And you could describe it in a way as being a spiritual connection, whereas actually I would see it just simply as being. I write about the thin place in The Wild Silence, and that's a sort of Celtic, religious, pagan, spiritual sort of concept.
I'd never heard of this before, this idea of the thin place. If you talk about that, that's really fascinating.
It's the idea of a place where this life and the next life come really close together, and where the two almost touch. Well, I wrote about that in relation to the feeling about the natural world, and how you can experience that sense of a thin place in your connection to nature. Look, for me, it's a point where actually that sense of the human and the natural world converge, and where you actually realise that it's not a separate thing, it is one thing, and that we belong to something so much bigger than just ourselves and our human concerns, that we are part of that huge natural whole. And I think that's why I was talking about the thin place, not in that conventionally spiritual way, but as a point of connection, as a point where we connect with who we really are, what we really are. And I was writing about that, really trying to express that sense that whatever happens to this earth, to this world we live on, doesn't happen to something external to us. It happens to us as being part of that. So we can't separate ourselves from it, because it is us.